Hello, smart students. Welcome to my channel. I have a question for you. How many of you find writing research papers daunting? Maybe it's your first time, maybe you've done it a few times, but still, I find that students, the idea of writing a research paper isn't necessarily easy to digest. So what I want to do today is I want to walk you through 3 different research papers, and I want to explain the different sections or components, if you will, of these research papers. All right? So first things first, I find there are generally 7 key components that all research papers contain, and then there's a few variable ones. And so I want you to be aware of what those variable ones are as well. And so let's go ahead and start with those key components. What are they? One is going to be a title page. Next is going to be your abstract, followed by your introduction, the methods section, results, followed by the discussion, and then typically ending with a conclusion. Now, like I said, this varies. Sometimes you might have a literature review or a research problem section, or perhaps limitations that you would list after the results or near the discussion section. And so with no more being said here, let's go ahead and jump into my computer and let's walk through these 3 examples. And yeah, let's go. And here we are. All right, starting with the first research paper here. The first element you'll have is going to be the title of your research paper. Essentially, the title is a glimpse as to what your research is about. So you want to come up with a title that captures your topic, your scope, and perhaps your methods in case it's relevant. But moving on down, the first main section in a research paper is going to be the abstract. Now, your abstract is what I like to call a snapshot of your entire research paper. This is going to be the summarized SparkNotes version of your research paper. So that way, when someone reads the abstract, they have a good overview of what your objective is, what methods you used to study your research, some brief understanding of what the results are, and what you concluded. Now, I will touch on keywords right here. Keywords are included in the abstract. These are going to be roughly 5 words, give or take, that are the most prevalent within your research. And this is simply for SEO. So when someone types in keywords in a database, say as Google Scholar, this is going to boost your paper in the algorithm. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the first main section in your actual research paper, your introduction. So what's the purpose of an introduction? It's kind of in the name. It's to introduce your research paper. But the way I like to describe it is that essentially the first portion of your introduction is going to introduce your topic. The last paragraph in your introduction is typically where the researcher is going to now explain their intentions for the research. Because you introduced your topic at the beginning, now they're going to tell you what their goals are, why they're researching this specific area. Everything in between is typically background information, context on your topic, all the needed information that your reader needs in order to understand the rest of your study. All right, moving on down the list, the next section that typically comes after the introduction is going to be your methods. And now your methods, that's where you're going to describe your research. So for example, did you conduct an experiment? Maybe you hosted some interviews, or perhaps you sent out a survey. As we can see in this first sentence here, this researcher states, a descriptive correlational survey design was used to answer the research question. So that's what method they use to conduct their research. Now, within the methods section, and this goes for a few other sections, sometimes there's going to be subsections. As we can see here, this research included the instruments, and then finally, they also included a subsection about data collection and analysis. The next main section that all research papers will include are going to be the results. And this is nicely put after the methods, because after you describe how you studied the research, it kind of makes sense that what were the results, that would come next. And so the results section, again, can be made up of a handful of subsections that are relevant to your research. So as we can see here, this researcher started their results by discussing the sample characteristics. We have some tables to show the numerical data with the different criteria that were explained in the instruments. There's a few other subsections that are relevant to the results. For example, they provided a description of procrastination, time management, and academic stress. So a section for clarity. There's also a discussion between the variables, the relationship between them. We have a few other charts here. And so when you're including your results, you really want to think about the best way for you to showcase the different results that you came up with in, again, whatever you use to perform your research. Because after that, we're going to move on to the next main section in your research paper, which is going to be the discussion. Your discussion is where you're going to fulfill the purpose of your research. Basically, now we're going to discuss everything above. So now that we know what our topic is, what the objective is with our research in that topic, how we're studying it, and what those results are, the discussion will lead you right into the final main section in a research paper, the conclusion. And I've had students find these two confusing because they seem similar, but they are different. So as I said, your discussion is where you fulfill the purpose of your research. Your conclusion then is going to be your final impression. After doing everything above, coming down to the bottom of your paper, your conclusion is simply that last final impression, your final thoughts on this topic, which is a rule of thumb. You'll note that conclusions are generally a lot shorter than the discussion. Conclusions typically are pretty short in research papers, so just keep that in mind. But with that, those are the main sections that structure a research paper. However, there are a few additional sections that you may run into. So let's take a look at this one. We have our abstract. Oh, let's start from the top. We have our title, our abstract, our keywords, our introduction. Now we have a literature review. So what is a literature review? Basically, it's a review of literature, obviously. Basically, the purpose of a literature review is for you to go research the current state of information on this topic. This is why it comes after the introduction, because you've introduced your topic. Now what you're doing is you're essentially introducing the research that's currently out there on this topic. So if you're solving a problem, this is the data that is available on this problem. I like to say a literature review is like recounting a secondhand story. You're recounting secondhand knowledge, because with a literature review, your reader will have a full 360 view of your topic, which is a perfect place for you to jump in with your new research to attribute to that area. Now, I also want to talk about problem of the research. This is something that commonly comes after a literature review, but not always. But since it's here, let's go ahead and discuss it. Problem of the research, also known as a problem statement, is simply what it sounds like. This is where you're including a brief section about the problem that your research is going to address. Now, if we were to read this brief sentence here, what we would have is, according to the findings in the literature, academic procrastination behavior is common among undergraduates, and insufficient time management skills is thought to be one of the possible reasons of it. This is the problem of this research. The subproblems are as follows. So, as you can see, according to the findings in the literature review, this is why the problem statement, it fits nice and neatly after a literature review. I have one more section that I want to point out to you. So let's go ahead and jump over here. And I've already scrolled down to the discussion section because it's a section you may run into that comes after, so towards the end of your paper. And what it is after the researcher performs their research, they host their discussion, you might see a section titled Limitations. And so what are limitations? Well, simply put, limitations are
things that you did not foresee that hindered your research. So you had an idea of how your research was going to go, and these are roadblocks essentially, or something that the reader needs to understand about the results. And so if I were reading through this, the limitations that this researcher is referring to is that through their methods and their research, the results, they were open to criticism that may have produced socially desirable responses or other bias. So the present findings are therefore preliminary and would be strengthened with future research, which is also why they have a subsection here for those future directions. What are their suggestions? Since they ran into these unforeseeable limitations, they're providing suggestions of what could be done in the future to fulfill this research as it was initially intended. Finally, the conclusion will come at the end of this research paper, just as it has in all the others.
And here we are. Okay, so if you've noticed, I've been doing a lot of research topics on my channel lately. And so if you have any suggestions for future video topics that I haven't covered yet, feel free to leave them down below. But that's gonna wrap up this video. And of course, if you have any questions on what I discussed today, you can drop that down below, as well as just say hello. I love talking with you guys. But with no further ado, I'm gonna start working on my next video. I'll see you guys there.